Listen, it's amazing to have you here with us live for the Q&A. I was trying to look at the chat there before I came on stage. I'm just going to pick out one or two questions that came from the audience. Is that okay with you?
Of course. Thank you so much.
And by the way, there were loads of hands up in the chat for the T's and C's.
So glad to hear that.
You won't be too surprised to hear that, Brittany. So question for Brittany from Daniel. What are practical ways to convince internet users to actually care about the value of the data they produce and to demand some kind of fee, value in return? I'm working on a related digital identity project, and it's really hard to find users who are really hesitating to accept the default data collection settings on the web.
Well, the truth is that a lot of us have really bad habits that are going to be a bit hard to get over, because we have been taught or we have been tricked and manipulated our whole lives into thinking that our data doesn't matter, that we should give it away without reading terms and conditions, that we should download any application even if we don't know or trust who's made it. So I think over the long term, there's going to be three different things that we need to do. And one is, of course, to educate ourselves. How do we keep our data private? What does that actually mean? What are the consequences of not keeping our data protected and of sharing it with the wrong people? These types of education programs are something I teach through my Own Your Data Foundation called Digital Literacy. The new global program is called DQ, like IQ or EQ, a Digital Intelligence Quotient. So please check out my my website, ownyourdata.foundation, for a little bit more about that. Secondarily, we're going to have laws and regulations that actually allow us to own our data as our property. We already have that in a couple of states in the United States. We have quite a few countries around the world outside of America that are considering this type of law. And we have a lot of regulators that specifically believe that users or consumers should be able to have full transparency over what they are going to give away. And if you are going to choose to give data away in a consensual manner, that you will be able to reap the benefits or have a data dividend off of the monetization of that data. So that is also a legislative and regulatory issue, besides you as an individual just being educated on how to protect your data. As you rightly asked, how to use digital identity solutions so that you can prove you are who you say you are, and you can consent or not to sharing certain types of data. Now, in the end, you might have all of the education and all of the great laws in the country you live in, but the most important part of all of this is ethical technology. So I'm very glad you mentioned digital identity solutions. We also need to be developing blockchain and distributed ledger technologies. We need to be able to have data wallets that tell us everywhere in one place that our data could possibly be going, and we can decide whether we want to share it with those organizations or not. I advise tons of different companies that are building data markets and are building different ways to model our personal data to make it even more valuable than it already is, so that when it goes on the marketplace, we're going to feel like it's actually worth it for us to be sharing our data. And so between education, legislation, and technology, this is how we're going to eventually solve the problem. But I think it starts with all of us deciding to care, deciding to use more ethical technologies that are available to us. Like instead of Google Chrome, you can be using Brave browser or DuckDuckGo. Instead of WhatsApp, which is owned by Mark Zuckerberg, you could be using Signal or Sense Chat, which is on a blockchain. Instead of Facebook, you can be using voice.com, a new social network where you own all of your data and you get paid for it. So there's a lot of options there. Even there's a new phone called Clear Phone, where it's privacy by design. And if you want to share your data, you get paid on a debit card that comes with that. So there's tons of options at our fingertips today, and we're going to see more and more as the years go by.
Thanks a million, Brittany. That's brilliant. And again, it's brilliant for people who are actually thoughtful about this. The question keeps kind of turning up here on chat is how on earth is the majority of the population going to understand and manage this? That does come back, doesn't it, to the technology companies themselves being ethical, and is there, I'm very interested in the DQ that you're talking about. Is there much take up in schools for digital literacy and really having people understand the value of their data at school level?
Absolutely. And I think that's the most important place to start, where our children don't already have bad habits. So the curriculum that I'm currently concentrating on teaching is for 8 to 12-year-olds. So it's usually before or during when kids get their first device. So you teach them everything from what are their data rights to how can you obey cybersecurity protocols to keep yourself safe, media literacy, so you can spot fake news and disinformation or hacking or phishing attempts. Then there's concepts like how do you use emotional intelligence when you're interacting with other people online, especially on social media? How do you counter cyberbullying by using emotional intelligence online? And then things like how do you protect your mental and physical health and not be addicted to your devices? You know, a lot of parents and teachers have spent a long time trying to prevent kids from having too much screen time. And I think all of us are even starting to use our apps to try to reduce our screen time. And then all of a sudden in 2020, we're all leading nearly completely digital lives. And because we can't see each other in person, we're spending, exponentially more time on our laptops, on our smartphones. And so we're now exponentially more vulnerable, which makes this education process so much more important. When I was at school, I got taught how to use a computer by saying, here's how you type, here's how you send an email. I didn't get taught that every time I decide to search for something in Google, that information is being recorded and traded and sold around the world in order to eventually target me for products. No one ever taught me that, but that's actually how the system works. So I think it's very important for young users to really understand what it is that they're doing. They're not just typing an email to their friend or to their family. They're actually using a piece of technology that is recording their information, where they are producing data, and everything they do is being watched and recorded. And they need to think about that when using certain tools, and therefore make better decisions in their day-to-day lives depending on what makes them comfortable. So I think having that implemented into the school curriculum is one of the most important things we can do. About 12 years ago, I worked on this program at Amnesty International, which was to teach human rights education and implement that into public school curriculums around the world. And it took 10 years to get that into 13 different countries, where nationally, every school in the country was teaching that human rights education program. Now, the DQ program for Digital Intelligence Quotient has only been an IEEE global standard for a few months and already has its first national program being implemented and partners in at least 20 countries around the world. So I'm specifically a partner helping implement within the United States, but there are tons of partners, especially after we just participated in the G20 conference, that are implementing that in countries across the globe. So I think over the next few years, you're going to see more and more schools, across Europe, Ireland. I think you're definitely going to see it more locally. And if there's anyone in the audience that's listening to this that is interested in teaching or becoming a part of this type of program, please write to us at info@ownyourdata.foundation, because this is definitely an all hands on deck kind of thing. We want more people involved, the better. We also have professionals programs for adults, because even though I think all of us have very bad habits when it comes to technology, it's never too late to teach people how to do the right thing and how to protect themselves.
That's absolutely awesome, Brittany. And I know for a fact that we have teachers in the audience, you'd be glad to know. So that's a very useful email address for them to have. Just moving on slightly then, we can learn so much from the past, and, people can go and watch The Great Hack, and they can read your book, Targeted. I've read it. It's well worth the read. But, here today, we're very interested in the future. So tell us a little bit more about, Own Your Data and some of the current initiatives you're looking at. I mean, I think, did I see the other day that you're one of the people who's endorsed Prop 24 in California? I know it's already been endorsed by the likes of Roger McNamee and other international data privacy advocates. Could you just, for our audience, tell us a little bit more about Prop 24 and what's involved?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really excited about Prop 24 in the state of California, specifically because the people who wrote CCPA, which is the California Consumer Privacy Act, which came into enactment this past January 1st, that was the first landmark piece of privacy legislation in the United States. The United States, it has traditionally been the most vulnerable because we have no national privacy legislation. So the state of California, being where a lot of our technology was birthed and where a lot of big technology companies that are American are still based, made the big stride forward in order to give us transparency into what data is being collected about us, the right to opt out, the right to withdraw or revoke our consent to be marketed to, the right to delete, the right to be able to be notified when our data is involved in a breach or a hack. And there's a short period of time upon which we are, where companies have the ability to notify us. And we would also get compensation for that breach. So that was a huge step forward. Although throughout this year, especially in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, a lot of different companies have said, well, I don't really have the capacity to comply with some of these laws. It's too expensive, or I don't have the right personnel. So one of the most exciting parts of CPRA, which is called Proposition 24, Prop 24, on the ballot this November 3rd, it actually goes a bit further by establishing a California privacy agency that would have 50 staff and be able to assist with compliance with the law. So if you're a small company, if you're a startup, if you're a medium-sized company that doesn't have data science expertise in-house, and it would be unduly prohibitive for you to try to figure out where all your data is, how to comply with these laws, how to make sure if your consumers request their data or request their data to be deleted, that you can actually do that, then this new agency will actually be able to assist you with that with government funding. So I find that incredibly exciting because I definitely think that there's a lot of companies that feel like this is an undue burden on them. And during a time where our economy is depressed around the world, where tons of industries and businesses have failed during the shutdown, I think it's so important to be supportive of small business at this time and make sure that privacy is something that is a good thing for these companies to offer to their customers and isn't just considered a burden. So last year also there was a bill that was dropped to federal Congress to establish a national data protection agency, which I'm so excited about. I really hope after November 4th, when we know who has won all of the elections and we know who we're working with in our legislature for the coming years, that we can get that type of bill passed. Because I really think that having a government agency that is there to assist, that has the data scientists, that has the expertise, that has public-private partnerships to make sure that companies that specialize in this can help other companies with compliance. I really think that that's going in the right direction. And it's going to be a lot easier to make privacy something that's tangible for not just the consumers, but for the companies that are producing technology products as well. So I definitely am very excited about that. Also, in terms of the overarching concept that I think Prop 24 is taking us more towards is data ownership. So CPRA lays the groundwork for us to eventually be able to sell our own data. And as you know, I'm a huge proponent of that. And one of the main reasons why that is so important to me is because I believe that this is the only real solution that we all have on our tables right now to cure extreme poverty globally. It's very possible that once everyone is holding a device in their hand that pays them for the data that they create, that gives them opportunities to make money just through their time and attention and completing simple tasks of watching different videos or targeted articles, whatever it happens to be, that you will make enough money off of your data to at least feed yourself and your family every single day. And that's very tangible. That's very near term. I don't see that as being very many years away because we already have some of the devices that are allowing us to do that. So I think in the next couple of years, you'll see a lot more people that instead of feeling like they're unemployed or underemployed, that they will have easy to use technology solutions to earn a universal earned income. And that's why I think setting the legislative foundations for us to own our data as our property, for us to have transparency into where it's going, for us to opt in or out, and that if our data is going to be monetized, that we get a dividend off of that that goes back to us. Nothing could be more important to me right now, and that's what I work towards every day.
Brittany, I absolutely adore that idea, and I'm going to follow very closely how you get on with that. You said one of your aims in the talk was to improve digital literacy and empower voters before they cast their vote. I'm talking about the USA. I think the last I looked, over 70 million US citizens have already cast their vote in the USA. And the election is just next week, as you say. How successful have you and your colleagues been, and how much of a problem was disinformation before this election, in your view?
So, unfortunately, I think that 2020 has been much worse for disinformation and fake news than even 2016. Of course, we had big platforms like Facebook and Twitter trying to make some policy changes. It was really too little too late, especially on behalf of Facebook. When we got into the first week of the global shutdown due to coronavirus, I was going on panels where I had, disinformation experts in Europe that had access to the Twitter fire hose, telling me that they had over 50,000 different disinformation campaigns that they were detecting every day in the United States alone. That is absolutely huge. That's a much bigger magnitude of a problem than anyone expected to have. Again, because we were underprepared to be thrust into a fully digital life this year. Nobody expected that. We thought we had at least a couple more years to start teaching people concepts like media literacy and digital literacy. But we are where we are. And therefore, I think what we're going to have to do for the foreseeable future is on November 4th, when we know who our legislators are, we're going to have to work a lot harder on getting national legislation in the United States. We're going to need to work a lot harder to regulate big tech and big social companies to protect consumers. And what would really help with elections and make all of this a lot more tangible, a lot more accessible, is for us to start doing digital voting or voting on a blockchain where everyone can download an app on their phone at home and you can safely and securely vote while not having to think about waiting for a piece of paper to arrive in the mail or turning a piece of paper in on time to your local post box, or going physically in person to a polling booth if you are a vulnerable person, during the coronavirus pandemic. So I think there's a lot for us to think about in terms of what we need to do to make sure our next elections are much more protected than 2020 was. Because unfortunately, I do think that this year was a complete disaster, and that we are going to see the most salient case study that we've ever had in why we need to do more and work harder to protect our democracy in the face of technological threats and in the face of big social monopolies, not protect users and instead concentrate on the profits that they're making for their shareholders.
Would it be terrible to ask you if you have any prediction for next week? given what you've just told me?
Ooh.
That's probably just too hard. Are you optimistic?
I am not optimistic that we're going to know the results next week. I think it's probably going to be quite contested around the United States. I think there's going to be a lot of recounts. I think there's going to be a lot of lawsuits. But what I can hope is that we end up with a much more ethical leader than we have today, that works with a team that cares a lot more about protecting democracy instead of undermining it nearly on the daily on television. So I'll leave that prediction as opaque as I can. But I will say that I do think that looking at the results of this election, looking at how difficult it has been for people to vote absentee for the first time or learn how to use paper ballots if they're not at the polls, that this is going to be a huge wave of momentum towards digital voting, towards more education about how to participate in democracy, towards figuring out how we have more accessible technologies. And therefore, in the end, that's going to be a good thing. I really do see a huge opportunity here for future elections for us to be able to improve upon all of the faults that we're going to see in the next week.
Brittany, I have to say, everybody, when they talk about you, tend to focus in on the past and Cambridge Analytica and you name it. I have to say, for me personally, I find it very, very cheering that there are people like you and Roger and everybody else out there working on our behalf and hoping to change the system and ensure that we can stop that level of disinformation and that we can make elections fair. So thank you so much for being with us. It was an absolute joy to chat with you. And listen, come back soon.
Absolutely. Hope to see you guys in person next time.
Definitely.
Thank you so much for having me.
Definitely, Brittany. Thank you.